From the turbulent beginnings of a nation in the grips of demonic occupation to the endgame of a questionable savior on one last nationwide conquer the world tour, Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous asks the question, what happens if we just let people do pretty much everything in a CRPG? How does a single leader bring a nation forward in the inevitable march of discordant malevolence brought on by this demonic horde spitting out of a giant villain womb after the safeguards are switched off? Pathfinder, just due to its name, is about you forging your own. Let's find out if it did a very good job. This game is from Owlcat Games. It's for $49.99 and should be out pretty much when this review hits. Gather your shorties before venturing forth. If you like these or the walking the walks, I would love for you to subscribe. Let's do this. Graphics are up first. Nothing really says Pathfinder like a cleric, a bard, and a fighter all riding into battle on a triceratops singing Night Ranger songs at the top of their lungs, or a beat-up team Rumpelstiltskin resting in a risky subterranean supervillain lair to heal up for that next hump into damnation. You get to see all this in the first, 2 or 3 hours of Pathfinder. Pathfinder's original title was no slouch, but it was held back by an immovable camera and some other graphical issues. It never really got the chance to shine like it probably should have in the CRPG space, especially against other luminaries like Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, or others like Pillars, which you can see those reviews here. Wrath of the Righteous adds a fully controllable camera and a sheen of polish to the spell effects and world environments to make a visual impact from the very start. It also does a very good job dissolving the landscape around you so that camera can pretty much see your characters at all times. And that sense of scale, the complexity is noticeably amped up in Wrath. Even from the very beginning, with you working through this massive city, fighting off demons as the world shakes, and a dragon and a locust man battle it out in the center courtyard. It ups the presentation considerably, especially against other games in the genre, with entire screen shaking effects and impacts resounding around you as you summon plagues, causing tendrils to grab enemies while they work through your front ranks with minotaurs, smashing axes into the paladine's head, and then their best friend explodes while another dude's arm flies off and they fall to the ground. And that's just a fight because two dudes wanted the same spot to put their vegetable cart up in. These kinds of over-the-top battles can happen pretty much throughout the entire game. Sadly, there are a couple issues here. The first is, even on the retail patch, there are a number of items with the wrong cosmetic look, like boxes that look like hats, and loot crates in the world that look like, T-posed style characters just standing there. Also, while the game's plethora of character customizations concerning the skills, the abilities, and the classes, with 20 plus classes and 12 races, the actual character options are woeful. They're incredibly low, with just a couple different body styles and face styles and a very lean mix of customizations for each race. The game doesn't have an in-game zoomed in cutscene, so that's probably the main reason here. It isn't out of the realm though, possibly, that you'll be running around and notice 2 or 3 of the people in your group looking a bit like carbon copies of one another. I've always found the Pathfinder art a little bit on the generic side, but this game throws a large number of different characters and archetypes and enemies at you to sort of mix it all up, and I think that did well. Speaking of large, there is a large number of settings that can impact your performance, and I want to make sure those are clear before we jump into this. First, this is one of the few games where difficulty settings can actually adjust the FPS you get. Why is that? Well, the game has some difficulty settings that allow for you to adjust the enemy party size, as well as the enemy party's use of extended spell capabilities, as well as the damage that they do. This matters because long-term spells can overlap in larger battles, and the more they overlap, the more your FPS is going to take a hit. With all of those settings cranked to the absolute max, a 1080 was able to achieve 1080p with all those settings on max and usually be around 60 FPS, though it did drop below that during those extended battles. This was something that also occurred with the 2080 Ti in 4K and even at 1440p as those battles extended. I know some people are playing the game with those settings off or the difficulty on casual or lower. I tested on all the difficulties, and this was something that did crop up, especially if you end up changing that enemy settings so that they don't do as much damage. Just be aware of that. Graphically, I like the presentation. I think this is a good package. I like the different styles that Pathfinder offers. I am not a big fan of the UI. I'll just state it right now. It hasn't really improved a ton from the original game. It's still fairly large and in charge, right in your face. I wish there were some adjustments that could be made. Also, I would have loved more customization in the characters themselves. Again, we don't see them up close that often, but there was a lot of times where they're close enough that you can notice there's some similarities there. Luckily, we don't see any of those issues in the audio presentation.
Careful now.
The gargoyles were clearly trying to capture as many prisoners as they could. I don't know the reason behind these abductions, but I'm not about to give the enemy what they want.
For Wrath, it's excellent. The game isn't fully voiced over for everyone all the time. A good deal of the characters are, though. And while there are a couple that aren't necessarily incredibly great, including one party member that just seems off compared to everybody else, I felt that there was a lot of top-notch acting in this. The writing does have a tendency to vacillate between old-style fantasy and current stuff. So they'll be like, yo and behold, I'm crunk. And it's a little bit weird. They don't drop that exact kind of term, but you get my drift. It was a little bit odd in the writing. It had a tendency to really skew either fantasy and then jump into modern style or vice versa. Wrath of the Righteous also tonally is an incredibly dark game when it comes to its soundtrack. It tells a story of a battle of these heroes against pretty much impossible odds to fight a demon horde. Musically, the game shifts over to a more tonally heroic soundtrack than I expected, though. While in dungeon runs, torture chamber caverns, and even dens of giant spiders, they lend a more somber mood. I think as a complete package, this was a bit more bombastic and over the top than I was actually expecting. I did notice a couple stingers playing prior to the actual events occurring in the game, though. This is a bit of a spoiler for an event. It didn't happen enough or during larger exchanges to warrant any kind of concern, but it did pop up once or twice. Now, I don't know what it sounds like to disembowel an evil dude wearing plate mail while 5 fathoms down in some forgotten ritual chamber, but I hope it sounds like this. Environmentally, there is a huge impact on the characters' voices, the spell effects, the hit effects, everything. It engages you, and the chanting to some mage 2 rooms down as they fantasy version glee your life away with some soul-leeching song, and you're searching for them constantly through different rooms, helps everything add this emotional atmosphere to it. The only complaint I have is that depending on your party makeup, you can sometimes get this repeating sound effect that was this constant loop as the woolly mammoth best friend of mine just kept trumpeting his victory call over and over and over and over again. Luckily, reloading that had it go away. And reloading is something you're going to do a lot. Let's talk about gameplay and the myriad situations you can find yourself in. So first of all, this is going to tell a story of a world almost instantly gone mad the moment you jump in, replicating the adventures for the Pathfinder tabletop game, but in digital form. It is a mammoth undertaking of over 60 hours for a single playthrough if you want to see a good deal of it. And that, of course, won't let you see a great deal of the game, as Pathfinder's recipe for the genre is a heap of customization, a bevy of mechanics, and just a little dash of a little bit of everything else to round it out. The first thing to know about Pathfinder as we jump into this is the difference in how it presents its rules from D&D in this video game. If D&D is your fascinating uncle spinning stories of greater times prior to your generation at a family reunion, Pathfinder's the other one that lands his helicopter on the picnic benches and is somehow both a rock star and mathematician and a small-time magician at the same time. There's a reason why this game is puzzling to some DMs. It is the customization nation's prize fighter in the role-playing space. Pathfinder has a large number of basic classes, and those basic classes also have a large number of subclasses, both of which can then spread into advanced classes later on when you hit prerequisites for them. And you can, at any time, also level up and move to a different class, dual classing to any other class and mixing and matching. Now, you start out the game, you pick your race and your sex and your basic class. While the staples are here, like your cleric and your fighter, paladin, and others you may expect, there are still more that are probably arcane enough that you're going to want to dive in and read the rules on. Luckily, it does indicate what their feats and abilities and everything they pretty much offer right there. Once you've decided that you want to pick a certain class, you pick your abilities, your origin story style backgrounds, and your feats, and you round them out. Now, this is going to create your basic character. I said basic, but seriously, there's some batshit crazy characters that can be created in Pathfinder, and that is half of the juice of the game. If you want to ride a dino into battle, throwing scald one-liners and smashing dudes with a sword, you can do that. What about a necromancer bard? Nothing like proving you can sing bad enough to raise the dead. You can do that. The magic here is how many things that you can create. At some point, I was reviewing this and decided I didn't love the gnome magic user I made, so I switched all his magic spells to touch. I added some levels of monk as well as a specialty class that gave him a skill that allowed him to teleport magically to any spellcaster that had attacked him successfully. Suddenly, old Bobbler Tenderfoot was dim-mocking, death-touching everyone, and anytime a spellcaster hit him, he'd teleport within range and boom, suddenly the magic user's on fire, sleepy, and wondering why this little gnome is pirouetting and somersaulting around and stabbing people. it was awesome. And that was a switch that happened mid-game. I'm not saying all the builds are going to be great. You can run into some crush here, especially if you're just leaping around. And sometimes two classes can feel a bit samey if you jump into one at a particular time and they overlap in some of their skills. It's the rubber band of character creation systems, for better or worse. But where this game steps up from its predecessor is that Pathfinder here tries its very best to stop horrendous decisions. Like when choosing feats, it'll give you a thumbs up or down, indicating that that feat helps your current build or whatever it may actually be. Now, that being said, don't take that too seriously, as sometimes it's just more of a warning that thematically it doesn't fit with the current weapon. It can't take into account your future plans. The game also has a tremendous amount of tutorials that unfortunately do pop up a lot, and so you'll have that tendency to want to click, I don't want to see that anymore. Just be aware that when you do so, you can also go into the encyclopedia and read up on any of the parts of the game that you need to. Understanding the classes and how to, at the very least, decide what you want to do, we can jump into the second part, which is the world itself and how the story interacts with you. Now, battles come quickly enough in this game, pretty much within the first 10 minutes you're jumping into the one. You can choose between real-time or turn-based. Think a many-player version of Diablo with the ability to pause by hitting the space bar. At any time, you can also choose to go that fully turn-based route. Now, in real-time combat, it can be a bit of a bitch. First, you can have like 6 players running around with their animals, and it's you in this fucked up country zoo and some tyrannical necromancer's downtown crib, and then you realize Mittens the death-dealing leopard is like somehow stuck in room 2, and you're in room 50. Or just moving about and getting attacks of opportunities from all of the enemies if you're not watching closely. Just be prepared for that. In turn-based mode, every action is either a full standard quick movement or otherwise. It's your job to figure out how to handle each one of these actions and moves in the allotted time that is a couple seconds that makes up a round. Be aware, though, that these do absolutely adjust the amount of hours you're going to be taken into this game. Doing turn-based is immensely longer. Where one mid-game battle took me about an hour in real time and pausing to do orders, it took many hours in turn-based when I tried that again. However, you will find that some skills just feel more suited for turn-based. For example, charge and a couple others like that. You'll probably find yourself using more in the turn-based than you will in real time. Not only because it's easier to set up and do, but just because of the way it all feels. You might be surprised to hear me say feeling when we talk about Pathfinder, because Pathfinder is more noted for its calculations, its thick as tome mechanics that have a lot of other games feel a little bit like two kids playing rock, paper, scissors to figure out who wins a chess match. That's the magic for some people and Pathfinder. This is noticeable the first time you level up your character and you see the sheet in front of you, getting skill points each level and feats every other level, and then finding a feat that gives you more skill points can feel overwhelming for someone new to a game style like this, let alone the game's love for synergy moves. Now, Pathfinder has a number of these where two characters in the team need to have the skill, and if they both do and use it near one another, huge bonuses can be applied during combat. Figuring that out, then figuring out which of the 10 characters you want with you, then also figuring out which of the creatures you want with you, as well as who needs to go on what quests, then balancing that against a single person's skills you might want to get, as well as weapon changes or a different type of enemy, is awesome, but again, noteworthy when it comes to its complexity. Pathfinder captures that crunch perfectly, and while you can auto-level the other characters, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think you should. When it comes to that, you are trading a quicker turnaround during those leveling up moments for the possibility of not having the best made team. It's sort of a delicious mess that isn't exactly out of the ordinary for Pathfinder, but I would tell you it's probably better to take your time and decide who you want to work with who else and not do that auto leveling. Of course, it's up to you. And as you take your exploratory committee for Homicide out there, you go to location-specific quests, you take character-specific ones, as well as the main story quests. You gather up levels, gather items, and consistently watch this tit-for-tat of everything that you get. Most armors hurt checks considerably. This is things like leaping over crevices that may hold a legendary fight or a mythic bit of armor on the other side, or a weapon. Some weapons may be amazing when wielded against particular enemy alignments, but not others. Get accustomed to hitting the C button on the keyboard to look at your character, or I for inventory. And while the foundation of Pathfinder is within the customization, it also has an interesting amount of breadth to this game. Mid-game, you're offered the ability to crusade, which means putting armies together to fight the demonic forces, controlling their leaders' upgrades, the army's makeup, watching morale as it's tracked by the wins that you've had, and then moving them around the map separately from your own with their own separate actual currencies. Luckily, you can turn those off if you want. You can also skip the entire crusade. I'm going to talk about a bug I ran into in the bug section on that, and I would probably not suggest you turn the entire crusade mode off. Also, because if you do turn it off, it's just off forever. Regardless of which class you have, at some point you're going to rest, and Pathfinder has an intriguing system for this that I want to talk about for good and bad. When you camp, if you're not in a specific safe place, corruption of the demon's power can infect your team, and this does ability damage. Also, during these times, you can put characters into specific slots for actions like standing guard or making potions, etc. The system works well enough, it stops spamming of the rest system, which I actually like, and a lot of games have that problem. However, when I turn the quest mode off to see how the game played, the totally safe places on the map disappeared because one of the safe places is your base, and that just goes away, resulting in my character slowly getting corruption regardless of what I did. Before the game could catch up and start to take out those enemies on its own in the background, which is what it does, my characters were already 3 levels deep in corruption because you do rest a lot in this game. Again, that's going to depend on your difficulty, but I just want to warn you that the game ends up offering all of these options, but sometimes those options, they're a little bit dangerous. While much of this review has covered those mechanics in the meat of the game, Pathfinder's also fairly grand. At some point in the game, you're going to be announced as a mythic hero. This depends on the circumstances and your choices you make in the quests, of which the game has a tremendous number. You can choose to attain this higher level of hero if you want. There are many different types of this, and you can skip it, but I wouldn't suggest that. For example, choosing to lead your nations as a mythic good character offers the ability to summon paladins, add special powers to your weapons, and instantly smite foes. Trust me, you are a badass quickly enough. Pretty soon you're that dude who racks a bolt into his crossbow and somehow it's a friggin' sword. Story-wise, I did like the quest well enough, but the middle section drug a little bit, and some of that was because of the quest log. It's like a fucking blog written by the traveling Wilburys. Each entry can have its own level of what the fuckness that's happening in there. Like one where it's just sort of rambling about the events occurring and a question at the end with a soft, maybe you should just find another one of these things that you found many hours earlier. And you're like, what even was that? Also, quests is where I had the number of bugs. Quests where the game said I needed an item were the especially poor ones. They just weren't in the inventory sometimes. Also, I ran into a number of issues with sticking ability score modifiers of all types. Armor that when taken off kept the score at the higher one, and corruption levels that wouldn't go away with many days of safe sleep, as well as restoration spells of the greater type. It was just odd. Luckily, the game has a ton of different difficulties you can choose and settings in there. Now, there's going to be some oddities here, as I described in the graphics section and in a few other places. Just be aware of that. And that brings us to the fun factor, the juice. Role-playing for polyglots and Rain Man. That's pretty much what this game is. I'm not saying you need an IB to play the game, but some of the first level skills can even read really complex, like does 1d4 damage to the enemy and -1 hit point of damage to every enemy near them, rounded up to the level of the caster or the ability of the class that gave you this skill. And that's like one of multiple feats that you're going to have, or multiple skills or abilities that you're going to have in the game. I like that. I like that complexity. A lot of people may not. That's one of the great things about the game, is the complexity of the builds and what you can do, and creating, like I said with my gnome, this character that just did something completely different about halfway through his life. I was like, midlife crisis for a gnome. Let's switch this up. And I was enjoying that switch up. I think it was great. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. You know, for PC, I would say this is $10 discounted. There's a lot of stuff you can get, and it is a really fantastic game. I would say it is worth it, but be aware of those bugs. I know some people who didn't run into a lot of bugs, but I also feel that when I was testing with, the spell effects completely on and multiple enemies and adjusting those difficulties. Those are things that perhaps in the back end, the game is not prepared for, or some bugs have slipped in. They'll fix those. When it comes to just experiencing it as it is, it offers a ton, and it offers some really hilarious things that you can do. And I like that. I wasn't super in love with the story. It wasn't really catchy like, let's say, Tyranny or something like that. But overall, this was a game that I can suggest you get if you can live with a couple bugs, certainly a couple more bugs than you might expect. Though, now that I think about it, I think Pillars of Eternity didn't even get patched for the Switch. I don't know. Somebody can tell me that in the comments. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Please check out, subscribe. It absolutely helps. And you can become a patron We do D&D, we do video game groups, we do streams, we do UFC, we do it all, and it helps the channel, and it helps me continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Peace out.